Good morning, boys and girls. How are you? My name is Mr. Benjamin Franklin, and I come to you from the 1700s, from the colonial times indeed. It is my understanding that you will be writing about the colonial times and the Revolutionary War, an important part in our history indeed. As part of doing that, it is important that you take some notes about this time period, indeed. So the next couple days, I will be reading this book to you called If You Were Lucky Enough to Live in Colonial Times. Indeed. Now, you will be taking notes, so as you listen, take notes. We'll get through half today and half tomorrow. All right, boys and girls, listen and learn from the one and only Benjamin Franklin. I was sent to you by the world famous teacher, Mr. Schwally. A fine guy indeed, I must say. Anyway, I shall proceed. When were colonial times? Oh, there's a lot in this book indeed. So, why don't we get started? When were colonial times? Colonial times were a long time ago. Colonial times began 70 years after Columbus discovered America. So even before I was alive, those times started. They began when some settlers came from Spain to live in a colony in America, and that was in the year 1565. Colonial times ended when the 13 colonies became the United States. That was in the year 1776. This book does not tell about all the years, but it will tell about all those 13 colonies indeed. Look at the timeline on the bottom of this page, and you will see here the colonial time periods right here. So we are discussing this period right here. What was going on. Okay? All right. What was it like to live then? Well, let me tell you about boys and girls. Did boys and girls in colonial times do the same things that you today? No, sorry. Did they go to the school? Did they have to worry about table manners? Where did they go on Sundays? What games did they play? What happened if they got sick? Well, this book will tell you. It tells you also about their work, food, houses, and clothes. Fine, fine clothes, indeed. This book will help you imagine what it was like to be a girl or boy in the colonial days. These would be the New England colonies. I was from here, Pennsylvania. Over there. There we go. Pennsylvania. Good old Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, indeed. All right, I proceed. What did colonial people look like? When you look in the mirror, you see you. If you lived in colonial days, you would look the same as you do now. But you would wear your hair different, your clothes different. Even baby clothes were different then. Clothes in colonial days had different names. If a baby fell, he fell right on his pudding. A pudding was a soft pillow for a baby. When boys and girls were 6 years old, they stopped wearing baby clothes. From that time on, they dressed just like their mothers and fathers. Where did they buy their clothes? Well, let me tell you, they did not have a Gap back then, nor a Kohl's. Most people in colonial days did not buy their clothes anyplace. Most people made all their own clothes. They planted flax to make linen, thread, and they raised sheep to get wool. Everybody in the family helped to make those clothes. The grandmother's job was to card the wool. The children gathered flowers, berries, and roots to make the dyes for the yarn to get some color into your clothing. People wore bright colored clothes in colonial days like yellow, red, purple, blue. Girls wore bright red cloaks and hoods. Boys wore stockings and caps, indeed. All right. Girls and boys went to the woods and brought many handfuls of different barks to make dye. I will not go into all the nitty gritty, but they had to get all their materials from nature to make their clothing. How interesting. All right. Everyone had to work. Boys and men did their share of the work. Their job was to weave clothes on a loom. Then the woman took the cloth and made clothes for the entire family. Was there a special time for making clothes? Um, the special time was all the time. We always had to make clothes because we couldn't just go to the store and buy them. So it was something you always had to think about. How did they wear their hair? Well, here's a picture of some young lads. This is how I decide to go. Girls kept their hair covered all the time, even in the house. They wore hats and hoods and kerchiefs. Boys had long hair. Yes. When wigs came into style, most men and even some boys in the big towns wore them. Some men put white powder on their wigs. On a windy day, the powder blew away like snow. It looked like I had a bad case of dandruff. Dandruff. What did people eat? Oh, now we're getting to the fun stuff. Corn, corn, and more corn. Boiled corn, roasted corn ground into cornmeal, and baked into corn cake and corn pudding. The Indians taught the people how to plant corn and how to cook it. If there was nothing else to eat, the people could always count on corn. But there were other things to eat: pumpkin, squash. We would get sap from the tree for our pancakes. There were no grocery stores, no stopping by at King's, no place to buy food in general. The people planted vegetables and fruit seeds that came all the way from Europe. They planted beans and would climb them up the corn stalks. They cooked the beans into a mush or porridge. All right, we continue. Well, then, of course, you need your fish. The men and boys fished. They came home with lobsters, clams, and many other kinds of fish. The men and the boys hunted. They came home with rabbit, squirrel, bear, and deer. Some families kept a few pigs, so they could have bacon, pork, or sausage. Yummy indeed. Mm-mm. During the cool days before winter, everybody worked extra hard. They had to get all their food ready for the cold months ahead. Meat was smoked, salted, and pickled. Apple and pumpkin and peaches were peeled, sliced, and hung to dry. Sometimes we would even turn them into jams, okay, that we would put on some bread. All right. There were not many cows in these early colonial days, so we didn't have a lot of milk. What we did drink was lots of cider from apples and pears and peaches. And we drank beer. Even children drank beer. Even for breakfast. Go figure. Did children have to worry about table manners? Indeed they did. And if they didn't, they would hear about it from their elders. I'll tell you a little bit about that. All right. When you sit down to eat with your family, you are allowed to talk. That's nice. If you lived in colonial days, you had to keep quiet, children. You could not even sit down. You had to stand at the table all through the meal. When supper was good, you could not say so. When supper was bad, you could not say so, especially then. You could not say a word at the table. Speak not was a rule to remember for all children. There were many rules to remember. Sing not, hum not, wriggle not was one rule. Has your mother ever said to you, don't take such big bites? Don't make so much noise when you chew. These were the same rules in colonial days. The Book of Manners said, stuff not thy mouth to fill thy cheeks. Make not a noise with thy tongue, lips, or breath in the eating or drinking. All be polite while eating, not like a pig. All right. Now, sometimes you did have to use your fingers. We did have spoons, but there were no forks until later times, okay, where some of us came up with that idea. The fork works very well. That was a good invention, I must say. You would use the same knife to cut your meat and work with wood. Yes, we didn't have all that stuff that you have nowadays. In many homes, one big pot was put on the table, and people would put the spoon or fingers into the pot to take out their food. We did not have all these utensils that you people have. Your plate was a wooden board called a trencher. All right, and you shared that trencher with your sister or brother. You didn't have your own plate. That would be too fancy. All right, did children go to school? Well, let's find out here. Some did, some did not. Compulsory education was not required till later. The first school that boys and girls went to in colonial days was called a dame school. The teacher was a woman and the children came to her house. In dame school, children learned to read and write. Did they have school books? Well, we had one called the New England Primer. And they would use something called a horn book. It was not pages that you would turn, it was a piece of wood with a printed page on each side. That printed page would have your numbers and your letters that you need to know for proper education. And the horn book got its name from the thin sheet of horn that covered the page. You could see right through it. As soon as children learned to read and write everything that was on their horn book, they were finished with dame school when they were done with that. All right, we did not have as much schooling as you do, indeed. Who learned more, girls or boys? Well, after dame school, boys went to another school to learn, and girls stayed home. Why would we do that? Most people thought reading and writing were enough for girls to know. They thought it was more important for girls to know how to spin and cook and clean the house. But some people said girls are as clever as boys. Why can't they learn too? So they were taught their daughters at home. Most boys had to go to school. The law said so. The law said every town with 50 families must build a school for boys only. Not really fair, if you ask me, because girls can do many of the same things as boys, indeed. Oh, the lights! That must be my sign that I'm almost done. Let me get that light back on. Oh, here we go. All right. And what was school like? This will be the last thing I'll touch on today until we continue tomorrow. The law did not say schools had to be comfortable, and most of them were not. There were hard benches to sit on. The school had only one room, which was freezing cold in the winter. The only heat came from a fireplace. Every boy had to bring firewood for the fire. If he forgot, he had to sit far away from the fire. He had to sit in the coldest part of the room, indeed. Look at this young lad over here. The family of every boy who went to school had to pay the schoolmaster. Often he was paid in corn or other food. Yes, indeed. Sometimes the schoolmaster had more food than he could actually eat. All right. There were no blackboards or no maps in colonial schools. There were no pencils either. Boys wrote with a lump of lead, or they wrote with a goose quill pen dripped in homemade ink. Paper was hard to come by. Most boys wrote on birch bark. They could always get more in the woods. All right. And the last thing I will say is, what happened if you didn't behave in class? Well, if you didn't behave, almost every schoolmaster in colonial days kept a birch branch handy, and almost every schoolmaster used it to whip schoolboys who didn't behave. And on that note, boys and girls, remember this: if you were caught biting your nails, you had to wear a card that said, "Bite Finger Baby." We like to humiliate children back in the day. See? All right. So that pretty much covers what about the schools, okay? And they talk a little bit that the Bible was probably one of the books we read most. But on that note, boys and girls, take your notes properly, and till tomorrow.